greatest drama, the memorable story of the great among us, written by you, the people.
This chapter, The Iron Commander, the story of General John J. Pershing. 1919, the First World War was over. In Paris, American doughboys marched in a great victory parade. But so many doughboys would never march again. Those flowers were for the dead heroes as well as for the living. So it seemed to one man in that parade. That man was General John J. Pershing. Later, he went to the graves of his fallen comrades. In those rows of simple crosses was the story of his life, a tragedy within a tragedy. 36 years before, he had entered West Point, poor but ambitious. The Army would be his career. Remnants of Geronimo's Indian band still raided the western frontier when he graduated. He fought against them, already then a man of iron. In the Spanish-American War, he was a captain with Teddy Roosevelt in Cuba, then off to the Philippines to pacify the savage Moro tribes. When the First World War began, he was General Pershing, patrolling the Mexican border against Pancho Villa's rebels. It was wild country, dangerous duty. He was far from home when death struck at his family. A sudden fire in San Francisco. Mrs. Pershing and the children trapped in the house. Only his young son Warren survived. The Iron Commander permitted no tears. He carried on grimly. Just as well, perhaps, that Pershing's personal tragedy merged quickly with the tragedy of his era. President Wilson had struggled to keep the United States out of the Great War raging in Europe. He failed. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare had made neutrality impossible. General Pershing was named to command the American Expeditionary Force. Across the Western Front for 3 blood-soaked years, millions of men had been locked in trench warfare. Hundreds of thousands had died in indecisive battles. Germany was still strong. France and Britain were near the limit of their endurance. The Allies looked to the United States for fresh manpower to fill the gaps in their ranks. May 1917. With the advance guard of the American Expeditionary Force, you sailed to France. No time for mourning, no time for your young son. The nation had been totally unprepared for war. On your shoulders was the vast responsibility for creating a civilian army and leading it to victory. The Allies welcomed you as a savior. You met with Sir Douglas Haig, the British field commander, and with the French generals Pétain, Foch, and Joffre. They asked you to give up the idea of an American army, combine your troops with their seasoned veterans under their experienced command. You refused. Then the French and British demanded those newly arrived American troops. To get them, they tried to have you deposed, did the wire pulling. It was your job to make soldiers out of those raw recruits. Drill and more drill, harsh discipline. The doughboys might hate you, but you'd make them fit for battle. In time, those men would smash the German front. But the Germans were aware of that danger. The German divisions drove forward in a great effort to break the deadlock on the Western Front. It had to be done now before the American Expeditionary Force was ready for action. They drove a huge wedge between the French and British armies. Paris was threatened. It seemed the war was lost. Then the Germans were stopped and the gap was closed. But that was only a respite. The Germans would strike again. They had to. In the United States, troop ships were loading with new recruits. The doughboys were singing, "Over there, the Yanks were coming." They were green, untrained, but eventually they could turn the tide of the war. In France, meanwhile, the French and British awaited the next German offensive. To bolster their lines, they demanded American troops immediately without more training. If Pershing refused and disaster resulted, the blame would be on him. Again, General Pershing refused. He would risk defeat and disgrace rather than sacrifice the lives of his men. July 1918. It had come. Germany's supreme effort to smash the Western Front before Pershing could take the offensive. One American division stood between the Germans and victory. If they broke through, Pershing would go down in history as the man responsible for losing the war. With blazing machine guns, the Yanks held fast and stopped the enemy. Germany's last and greatest offensive had failed. You had been right in holding the American army together at any risk. 2 months later, your men were ready for decisive action. They moved up toward the front. Those men you had fought so hard to retain under your command. From clerks and farmers and mechanics, you had transformed them into professional soldiers, the best in the world. Now they entered the trenches, prepared to attack. It began with a huge artillery barrage on a morning in September 1918. The first blow was struck by 7 American divisions charging over the top. It was the beginning of a general offensive with which you hoped to crush the Germans and end the war. The first objective, Mihiel. The months of drill and discipline paid off. The town fell 2 days after the start of the offensive. No pause. In the field, you directed the troops toward the neck, the Argonne Forest. The German positions in the Argonne were said to be invincible, but they fell after hard and bloody fighting. The German front was crumbling. One more blow would do it. The city of Sedan was the target. By now, the American Expeditionary Force was a magnificent fighting machine with great field commanders, including Douglas MacArthur and George C. Marshall. The German army was shattered, retreating in defeat. Sedan fell. Nothing left for Germany but surrender. Your iron resolve to hold your army together had caused her downfall. In Paris, where you met Woodrow Wilson, it was suggested that you could become President of the United States. You rejected the idea. You were a soldier. Returning home, you were offered positions of wealth and power. You turned down all such offers. To you, wealth was as unimportant as fame. You would remain in the army. Waving goodbye to the crowd, you moved back into obscurity. One post you accepted proudly, Chief of Staff of the United States Army. The years passed quietly. You became a remote, almost legendary figure to the American people. At Armistice Day celebrations, you warned of the danger of new conflicts. During trips to Europe, you had seen the military rebirth of Germany. America must be kept strong, lest another world war find us again unprepared. But the people didn't listen. They now had other interests. In the late 1920s, it was speakeasies, bootleg booze, and rum running. Shipwreck Kelly was the new hero, and flagpole sitting was the latest outdoor sport. In the 1930s, it was the pros and cons of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal. The German invasion of Poland jolted the United States out of her complacency. The nation was at the brink of another war. There was confusion as public opinion divided between isolation and intervention. But in Pershing's mind, there was no confusion. Although 80 years old, he spoke out strongly.
The Allies are fighting a war for civilization. They are holding our front line. And we have a vital concern in the outcome. We should send not only food, clothing, and medical supplies, but also arrange to send airplanes, artillery, small arms, and ammunition in unlimited quantities. There is no time to lose. The Allies need every encouragement it is possible for us to give.
When the United States entered the war, Pershing yearned to lead the GIs into battle as he had led their fathers. It was impossible, too old. But he had this satisfaction. Their leaders would be men he had trained in the hard school of the First World War. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, General Douglas MacArthur, General George C. Marshall. Another satisfaction. Pershing's son enlisted. The old man was pleased. Warren would make a good soldier. First with alarm, then with pride, he followed the course of the war. He had a new ambition. With victory, he'd go to Paris for the victory parade. But when it came, he was too weak. For many years, he had been living on borrowed time. General Pershing celebrated the victory in Walter Reed Hospital. His end came 3 years later. The Iron Commander lay in state in the nation's capital. Now that he was gone, the people realized the towering stature of the man and the greatness of their loss. From all over the nation, his comrades in arms of the First World War came to pay their last respects. From the capital, they carried his casket to Arlington Cemetery. The saddle of his horse was empty, boots reversed in the stirrup. For 60 years, Pershing had fought his nation's battles. He had surmounted personal loss and the mass tragedy of a world war, achieved the highest rank ever bestowed on an American military leader, General of the Armies. Arlington Cemetery, last resting place of America's military great. To this hallowed place, they brought the Iron Commander. He had always been a man apart from ordinary men, separated from them by size and rank and duty. Now, as John J. Pershing was put to rest with Robert E. Lee and other great leaders, he found his proper place in the roster of the nation's heroes. An end to wars. No more lonely burdens of decision. For the Iron Commander, the long tour of duty was finished.
Be with us again next week at this time, when the greatest drama, true film biographies of the great among us, again comes your way.